Alara had always believed she was clever. She could read the intentions of noblemen, the subtle flicker of fear behind polite smiles, the quiet lies hidden in courtly words. Tonight, however, she realized she had been foolish. She had thought the wedding was a joke, a playful masquerade arranged to amuse the human court. But as she stepped into the great hall, her certainty faltered. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars above her, casting pale gold light across a crowd of masked nobles. The air smelled faintly of roses and something darker, something she could not name. Every laugh and whispered compliment felt rehearsed. Yet beneath it pulsed a tension she could feel in her chest. She clutched the folds of her silver gown and took a slow breath, reminding herself that she was only here as a witness, a spectator, nothing more. From the far end of the hall, a hush fell. Heads turned, masks tilted, and even the music seemed to falter. Alara's gaze followed the source of the silence. A man had entered the room. Not just any man. He was tall, impossibly graceful, and the air around him seemed to darken, as if shadows themselves had chosen to follow him. His eyes, the color of midnight with faint specks of silver, scanned the crowd with quiet authority. When they met hers, she felt the heat of 1,000 candles against her skin. The whispers began, low and cautious. "The Vampire King," someone muttered. Alara's heart skipped a beat. Vampire King. The words sounded like myth, like stories meant to frighten children. She had always thought such beings belonged to bedtime tales, not to glittering ballrooms of her world. And yet, there he was, real, breathing, moving like a shadow stretched into human form. He did not approach at once. He did not speak. He simply watched, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Alara wanted to look away, to convince herself that this was part of the masquerade, part of the stage drama she had agreed to witness. But her eyes would not leave him. Something about him demanded her attention, a pull she could not explain. As the ceremony began, she tried to remind herself of reason. This wedding was fake. She had seen the elaborate preparations, the actors practicing their parts, the florists delivering flowers that would never be touched. It was all a performance. And yet, when the man approached, there was no pretense in his movements. Every step was deliberate, every glance heavy with unspoken power. He stopped before her, and the room seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. Alara's pulse thundered in her ears. Then, he leaned close, and she felt his voice as much as heard it. Soft yet certain. "Nothing will be canceled." The words sent a shiver down her spine. They were not a threat, exactly, nor a promise in the way humans made promises. They were something older, something eternal, something that resonated deep inside her. Alara tried to step back, to regain the certainty she had clung to for so long. But she could not. The ground felt unsteady beneath her feet. Her own breathing sounded strange in her ears. The Vampire King straightened, his gaze holding hers with a quiet insistence that left her both terrified and strangely compelled. He did not raise his hand, did not make a move that could be called aggressive. Yet she felt an invisible chain linking them, invisible but unbreakable. The officiant, a man in gilded robes, began to speak, and Alara realized that the ceremony was not the fake spectacle she had believed it to be. There was no jest in the words, no lightness. Each phrase carried weight, a gravity that seemed to press against her chest. She stole a glance at Kellen the Vampire King, and his eyes followed hers, unwavering. In that moment, she knew she could not leave, could not turn away, could not pretend anymore. Her thoughts swirled. How could she have been so blind? How could she have thought this was a game? The hall, the lights, the music hall of it was real, and so was he. And yet, beneath the fear, a strange thrill began to stir. She did not understand it, but it was there, a faint ember glowing in the dark corners of her chest. The ceremony progressed, and with every word spoken, every candle flickering against the walls, the room grew colder. Shadows seemed to gather in corners where the light did not reach, watching, waiting. Alara could feel them, the ancient and silent witnesses of Kellen's line, and they made her heart ache with a mixture of dread and fascination. She was not merely a guest tonight. She was something more, though she could not yet name it, a soft, Almost imperceptible smile curved Kellen's lips, as if he knew the question swirling in her mind. "Do not be afraid," he whispered, though his lips did not move in a way she could see. The sound was in her mind, like a secret note passed directly to her soul. She swallowed, uncertain whether she wanted to hear more. The room darkened suddenly. One of the chandeliers flickered, then another. The music stopped mid-note, and a cold breeze swept through the hall, carrying with it the faint scent of roses and iron. Nobles murmured nervously, glancing at one another, but Kellen remained still, calm, his eyes fixed on Alara with an intensity that rooted her to the spot. It was then that she realized she was no longer just watching. She was part of the night itself. The world had shifted around her, slowly, yet irrevocably. The fake wedding she had come to mock had become something real, something binding. And the man before her, dangerous, ancient, magnetic, was the reason. Her mind tried to grasp at logic. Escape she could leave, she told herself. She could claim she had been mistaken, that she had been part of a play. But the thought of stepping away from him, from the way he made her chest tighten and her pulse race, was unbearable. She had never felt so tethered to anyone in her life. Then Kellen's voice returned, low and certain, curling through her mind like smoke. "You belong to this night now." The words were simple, yet heavy. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. Her knees weak beneath the weight of the truth she could not deny. Belong, not as a pawn, not as a guest, but as something entwined in a fate she had never imagined. The masquerade was no longer a masquerade. The wedding was no longer a joke. And she, Alara, clever, cautious Alara, was no longer merely an observer. She wanted to speak, to demand explanation, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she watched as Kellen moved past her, each step deliberate, each movement commanding the room's attention without effort. Even as she stood frozen, she felt the pull of destiny, the invisible thread that now linked her to this man, this night, in this castle of shadows. Her eyes followed him as he turned toward the altar. A single candle flickered near his hand, casting long, dancing shadows across the marble floor. The room was silent, expectant. And then, as the ceremony's words echoed in her ears, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down, not in menace, but in inevitability. She could not escape it. She could not deny it. She could not ignore the truth shimmering in Kellen's dark, unyielding gaze, the whispers of the court, the rustle of gowns, the distant sounds of the city beyond the castle walls. All seemed to fade into insignificance. Only Kellen remained, and only the unspoken promise of his words lingered in her mind. Nothing will be canceled. Alara's heart pounded as she realized the depth of what had begun. Her cleverness, her plans, her doubts all seemed irrelevant now. The night had claimed her, and Kellen, the Vampire King, had already marked the boundaries of her fate. She did not yet understand what it would mean, what dangers or wonders lay ahead. All she knew was that she could not turn away. The candles flickered one final time, and the shadows leaned closer. And in that breathless, electric moment, Alara knew she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The fake wedding had vanished. Only the real night remained. Only Kellen. Only the impossible, inevitable, inescapable truth of what was to come. And then, in the hush before the next movement of the ceremony, she heard his whisper again, soft but piercing, almost inside her own mind. "You belong to this night." And with that, the world seemed to tilt. And Alara understood that nothing at all would ever be the same again. Alara woke with a start, her head heavy and her thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. She was not in her own room. The walls around her were stone, cold and smooth, illuminated by flickering torches that cast long, restless shadows across the floor. Her silver gown had changed soft black fabric now hugged her figure, embroidered with threads that seemed to shimmer like moonlight on water. She sat up, her heart pounding. The events of the previous night returned in fragments, the masquerade, the whispers. The Vampire King's words, "Nothing will be canceled. You belong to this night now." A cold shiver ran through her, both from fear and something she could not name. A curiosity that drew her toward the man whose presence still lingered in her mind. A soft click echoed through the chamber, and a door slid open. A tall figure stepped into the room. The torchlight danced across his sharp features, his eyes still the color of midnight. Kellen, the vampire king, moved with quiet elegance, his gaze fixed upon her. "You are awake," he said, his voice low, smooth, like the sound of velvet brushing over stone. Alara swallowed hard. "Where am I?" Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. "You are in my castle," he replied simply. There was no anger in his tone, no accusation, only certainty. "You could leave, if you wished, but the night will not allow it easily." And neither would I. Alara's mind raced. Could she truly leave? Was she a guest, or had she become a prisoner of fate? She rose, testing the strength in her limbs, and stepped closer to him. Why am I here? What do you want from me?" Kellen's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, yet it carried centuries of loneliness within it. "I do not take what is not offered willingly, but the night itself, it has claimed you. You are part of it now, and part of me." Her stomach twisted at the words. She did not understand them fully, yet something deep inside her stirred. She felt tethered to him, as if invisible threads of shadow and light wound around her soul, binding her in ways that were neither entirely frightening nor entirely comforting. He gestured toward a window, revealing the castle grounds beyond. The night stretched endlessly, the sky heavy with stars that seemed closer than usual, and the forest beyond whispered secrets she could not comprehend. "This world," he said, his hand tracing the air as if painting invisible lines, "is not yours to understand completely. There are powers older than kingdoms, older than humans, older than even me. And now, you are part of that world." Alara's pulse quickened. "But I don't belong here. I'm just—" Her words faltered. She wanted to deny it, to cling to the reality she had known, but it was slipping through her fingers like sand. Kellen stepped closer, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them. "Belonging is not a choice we always make," he said softly. "Sometimes it is given to us, whether we wish it or not. Sometimes it is taken." Her breath caught. His voice was gentle now, almost intimate, but it carried a weight that pressed against her chest. She wanted to speak, to question, to push him away, but the pull was too strong. She felt herself leaning toward him without realizing it, her hands trembling. Kellen studied her, his expression unreadable. "Fear is natural," he said. "Curiosity is natural, but you will learn. The night is not cruel. It only reveals what lies within us." Alara wanted to argue, to demand freedom, yet she could not tear her gaze from his. There was a strange magnetism about him, a quiet power that both frightened and fascinated her. And beneath it, she thought she saw something else, something almost human. A flicker of vulnerability, a longing buried beneath centuries of rule. He extended his hand, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Walk with me," he said. Hesitation warred within her, yet the pull was undeniable. She placed her hand in his, and the moment their fingers touched, a chill ran through her, like the brush of moonlight on cold stone. The castle was vast, corridors twisting like veins through stone, lit by pale torches that burned without smoke. Shadows moved strangely along the walls, stretching and twisting in ways that seemed almost alive. Alara kept close to Kellen, her eyes wide with awe and fear. Yet every step she took with him made her heart beat faster, each pulse echoing with an unspoken rhythm she could not name. They arrived at a chamber filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts she could not recognize. Kellen motioned to the shelves. "These are the histories of my line, the tales of those who came before me. They were not all noble, not all kind, but they were enduring, and so must we be, in our own ways." Alara ran her fingers along the spines of ancient tomes. The air was thick with knowledge, secrets of centuries bound in leather and ink. She felt both overwhelmed and strangely drawn to it. "And where do I fit in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kellen's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "You are part of the story now. Your courage, your choices, your heart, all will shape what comes next." Alara looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. She wanted to refuse, to assert her independence, yet a small, reluctant part of her recognized the truth in his words. She had always been clever, but cleverness alone could not save her from what was coming. They spent the hours wandering through the castle, Kellen showing her rooms filled with relics, portraits of vampires whose lives had stretched beyond centuries, and chambers that seemed suspended between night and day. He spoke little, but every word carried weight. Every glance seemed to measure her, test her, understand her. Finally, they reached a balcony that overlooked the forest below. Moonlight poured over the trees, silver and cold, the shadows beneath the branches moving like living things. Alara felt a strange pull toward the darkness, a desire to step into it and see what lay beyond the familiar world she had known. Kellen stood beside her, silent, his presence comforting yet overwhelming. "This is your choice," he said softly. "You may step back into the world, or you may embrace what is to come." Alara's mind raced. She thought of the masquerade, of the lies she had believed in, of the life she could return to. And yet, looking into Kellen's eyes, she realized that the life she had known no longer existed. Something had shifted, something permanent, something that would not allow her to leave untouched. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes of laughter and music from the world beyond. And the shadows of the castle seemed to lean closer, as if urging her to choose. Her heart ached with longing and fear, and in that moment, she understood. She was no longer just a spectator. She was a participant in a story far older and deeper than she could have imagined. Kellen turned to her, his eyes holding hers with a quiet insistence that left her breathless. "You feel it, don't you?" he whispered. "The thread that binds us. It has always been here, waiting." Alara's chest tightened. She did feel it a pull, a connection that defied logic or reason, a whisper of destiny threading through the darkness. Her hand shook as she reached out to touch his, unsure if she wanted to bridge the gap or flee from it entirely. Before she could decide, a sudden movement in the shadows below caught her eye. A figure emerged from the forest, shrouded in darkness, moving with a purpose that set her nerves on edge. Kellen stiffened, his hand tightening around hers. The calm, controlled expression he had worn all evening shifted, just slightly, revealing a glimpse of something older, fiercer, and protective. "Stay close," he murmured, almost to himself, as he led her back into the safety of the castle. The sense of danger was subtle, yet undeniable. The night itself seemed to watch, waiting, as if it knew that Alara's first step into the Vampire King's world had only just begun. As they disappeared into the corridor, Alara realized that she no longer had a choice. The night had claimed her, and Kellen's words echoed relentlessly in her mind. "Nothing will be canceled. You belong to this night now." Her heart pounded, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a strange, thrilling curiosity. She did not yet understand what lay ahead, what dangers or wonders awaited her. But one thing was certain. The threads of fate had pulled her into Kellen's world, and there was no turning back. And in the silence of the castle, beneath the flickering torchlight and the watchful shadows, Alara understood a truth that both terrified and enthralled her. The night had chosen her, and the Vampire King was its guardian, its herald, and its most dangerous secret. The castle seemed endless, corridors twisted like a labyrinth, lit by pale torches whose flames flickered as if aware of her presence. Alara wandered through them, careful but curious. Every step she took echoed against the cold stone, a soft rhythm that made her heart beat faster. She had spent hours with Kellen yesterday, learning that she was no longer just a guest but a participant in a story far older than her world. Yet despite his quiet guidance, she had many questions, and the castle seemed to hold the answers in its silent shadows. She reached a grand hall, lined with mirrors that reflected her image in strange, distorted ways. Her own face stared back at her, pale and uncertain, framed by the flowing black gown Kellen had given her. But there was something else in them. Reflections, something she could not quite name, a flicker of movement, a shadow that seemed almost alive. Alara shivered, a mix of fear and fascination. She was not alone. The castle was full of secrets, some harmless, some dangerous. She could feel it in the air, in the faint hum that ran through the walls. A pulse she could not explain. A sudden sound, a soft scrape of claws against stone made her spin. A figure lurked in the shadows, pale and tall, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. A rogue vampire, one of Kellen's subjects who had not yet pledged full loyalty. He moved toward her, silent but threatening. "Who are you?" Alara whispered, her voice shaking, though she tried to steady it. The vampire's lips curved into a smile, sharp and predatory. "I am free," he said, voice low, almost a hiss. "And you? You do not belong here." Alara's mind raced. She was not a fighter, not trained in battle or strategy, yet she could not let him approach her. Her hand shook as she looked for something to defend herself. The rogue's steps were slow but deliberate, each one echoing in the silent hall. Then a shadow moved faster than she could follow. Kellen appeared between her and the intruder, tall and commanding. His eyes, dark and fierce, locked onto the rogue. "Leave," he said. And the word carried the weight of centuries. The vampire hesitated, then lunged. Kellen's movement was fluid and swift, a blur of motion that Alara could barely comprehend. Within moments, the rogue was subdued, pinned against the wall. Kellen's gaze returned to her. "Combat intense? Are you hurt?" he asked softly, the earlier intensity replaced with concern. Alara shook her head, too stunned to speak. I'm fine," she managed. Kellen's expression softened, but a shadow lingered in his eyes. "The world beyond this castle is dangerous," he said quietly. "Even those who seem harmless can carry darkness. That is why you must learn courage, Alara. That is why you must trust and choose carefully." She looked at him, understanding dawning. Trust, courage, not just for herself, but for him, for the kingdom, for something far larger than she had ever imagined. And beneath it all, a spark of admiration and something deeper, something she dared not name began to grow for the man who had saved her without hesitation, whose presence both frightened and captivated her. Over the following days, Kellen guided her through the castle. He showed her rooms filled with ancient artifacts, libraries with scrolls older than kingdoms, and corridors where shadows whispered secrets of the past. Alara absorbed it all, learning the ways of this world, the rules that govern the supernatural, and the delicate balance between human and vampire realms. Kellen was patient, teaching without condescension, but every lesson carried weight. Alara realized that the world she had known, the human court, her family, even the masquerade she had once believed to be a joke, was fragile, fleeting. Here, in the shadows, power was absolute, and choices had consequences that could echo for centuries. One evening, Kellen led her to a chamber she had not seen before. The walls were lined with mirrors, yet these mirrors did not reflect only her image. They shimmered with faint light, revealing glimpses of places she had never visited, moments from Kellen's past, and shadows of futures that might come to pass. "This is the Hall of Reflections," Kellen explained. "It shows not only the past, but the possibilities that lie ahead. You will see truths here that you may not be ready to face." Alara stepped forward, hesitant. In one mirror, she saw herself, dressed as she had been the night of the masquerade, standing in the hall before Kellen whispered his words. The reflection trembled, and she realized that the choice she had made to remain here had already changed her. Another mirror showed Kellen, alone, centuries ago, standing in a battlefield of shadows, fighting enemies she could not comprehend. His expression was fierce, but his eyes carried a loneliness that pierced her heart. She realized then that beneath his power, he had carried sorrow, regret, and longing for someone who might understand him, someone who could share the burden of immortality. A faint sound made her turn. The rogue vampire she had seen before appeared in the doorway, unafraid, watching. Alara's heart raced, but she did not run. Something inside her, the courage Kellen had nurtured, urged her to stand firm. Kellen stepped beside her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Do not fear him," he said softly, yet his voice held authority that brooked no challenge. "But do not underestimate him either. Courage is not the absence of fear, Alara. It is the willingness to face it." The rogue stepped forward, testing them, and Alara felt a surge of determination. She would not be a pawn. She would not be a victim. With Kellen at her side, she felt stronger. Even as her hands trembled. Suddenly, the rogue lunged. Kellen moved faster than thought, intercepting him. But this time, Alara did not step back. She stepped forward, placing herself between them, surprising even herself. The rogue hesitated, as if sensing that her presence, her courage, carried a force of its own. Kellen's eyes met hers. A mixture of pride and something else, something deeper, almost tender. "You are braver than you know," he murmured, "and you are learning. That is all I ask." The rogue, realizing he could not break the connection between them, retreated into the shadows. Disappearing like smoke, the hall of reflections remained. Quiet, yet the tension lingered, as if the night itself had been holding its breath. Alara turned to Kellen. Why am I so drawn to you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Kellen did not answer immediately. He looked at her with a gaze that seemed to see not just her body, but her mind, her heart, and the parts of her she had hidden even from herself. "Because," he said finally, "you are not afraid to face the shadows. And the night recognizes those who are unafraid." Alara felt her chest tighten. There was a truth in his words, but it scared her. Not fear of him, exactly, but the realization that her life, her very soul, was entwined with this ancient being, this vampire king, in ways she could not yet comprehend. That night, she lay in the chamber Kellen had prepared for her, unable to sleep. Her mind replayed the day, the rogue, the hall of reflections, Kellen's words. She realized that courage was no longer just a concept. It was a choice she would have to make again and again if she hoped to survive this night, or perhaps to thrive in it. As she stared at the ceiling, shadows dancing like silent specters across the walls, she heard Kellen's voice, soft and distant, as if carried on the wind. "Do not fear what you feel. The thread that binds us is stronger than you know." Alara's fingers brushed against the edge of the bed, and she thought of the pull she had felt from him, the strange, undeniable connection that had begun the night of the masquerade. Her heart raced, her thoughts tangled between fear, fascination, and a longing she could not yet name. And then, as the first pale light of dawn touched the windows, a soft sound echoed through the castle corridors. Footsteps, not hers, not Kellen's. Someone or something was moving closer. The shadows stirred. The night was not done with her yet. Alara's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She rose from the bed, heart pounding, unsure whether to hide or face whatever was coming. The castle, silent and ancient, seemed to lean closer, holding its secrets just out of reach. Kellen's voice, distant but clear, whispered again in her mind, "The night has chosen you. There is no turning back." And at that moment, Alara realized with both dread and awe that her journey had only just begun. The test of courage and heart were coming, and with each step, she would learn more about the vampire king and more about herself than she had ever known. The night had grown restless. Alara could feel it even before the first whispers of danger reached her ears. The castle, which had seemed so quiet and eternal, now pulsed with unease. Shadows shifted where no light fell, and the corridors that had once been safe now felt uncertain, alive with movement she could not see. Kellen stood at the edge of a balcony, his silhouette sharp against the pale moonlight. His gaze was distant, focused on the forest beyond the walls, and his posture tense, as though he could sense every stir in the darkness. Alara approached cautiously, her footsteps light on the cold stone floor. "Kellen?" she asked softly. He turned his head slightly, his eyes, still the color of midnight with flecks of silver, meeting hers. There was a weight in his gaze she could not name. "The world beyond these walls is not quiet," he said, his voice low. "Trouble is coming. Forces that do not respect the peace of night or the fragile balance of our kind." Alara swallowed, the unease in her chest growing. "Who?" He shook his head, his expression tight. "I do not yet know. But they will test both our courage and our trust. And you, Alara, you will have to choose whether to stand with me or flee. Neither option is without risk." The words made her pulse quicken. "Stand with him, flee." Both seemed impossible now. She could not turn away, not after everything she had seen, not after the connection that had grown between them. But fear clawed at her heart, a shadow that refused to leave. Days passed. Though time felt different in the castle, the walls seemed to stretch, the corridors to twist endlessly. In the forest beyond whispered secrets she could barely comprehend. Kellen spent hours showing her the hidden passages and defensive charms, teaching her how to read the subtle signs of danger, how to sense the movements of the night. Yet no lesson prepared her for the day the human noble arrived. He came without warning, his carriage moving silently through the misty forest, as if the very night had hidden his approach. The man was polite, elegant, a courtier of high rank, but his words carried poison. He claimed Alara had been promised elsewhere, that the masquerade she had believed to be a joke was a trap devised by Kellen to seize control over human lands. Alara's heart sank. Doubt flickered in her mind, small but insistent. Could Kellen's intentions really be as pure as he claimed? Could she trust him when so much about this world was dangerous, unknown, and seemingly hostile? Kellen stood beside her, calm but alert, his hand brushing hers in a silent reassurance. "Do not believe everything the humans say," he whispered. "They do not understand this world. Their lies are born from fear." Alara wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the comfort of his words. But uncertainty gnawed at her. She had stepped into this night willingly, drawn by curiosity and something deeper. Yet now, the foundations of trust she had begun to build felt fragile. That night, she could not sleep. She wandered the corridors alone, the torchlight casting long shadows across the walls. Her mind replayed the words of the human noble, the warnings he had whispered, and the flicker of doubt that had lodged itself in her heart. Kellen found her in the Hall of Reflections, his presence sudden yet calm, like a shadow that had always been there. "You worry," he observed, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know what to think," she admitted. "Everything is changing so fast. I thought I understood this night, but now I'm not sure about anything." Kellen stepped closer, his gaze piercing hers. "Doubt is natural. Fear is natural. But running from them, from us, will not save you. Courage is not the absence of fear, Alara. It is acting in spite of it." Alara felt the truth in his words, yet her heart still trembled. There was longing there too, an ache she could not ignore. The longer she stood near him, the stronger it grew. A pull that seemed to weave their fates together in a tapestry too intricate to unravel. A soft sound echoed from the shadows of movement, a whisper. Alara's breath caught. A figure emerged, stepping into the torchlight. The human noble had come closer than she had imagined, his eyes sharp, calculating. He spoke again, this time louder, trying to sway her. "You are not bound to him, Alara. You do not belong to this night. Return with me, and the world you know can be yours again." Her chest tightened. She wanted to run, wanted the comfort of her old life. But something inside her, the courage Kellen had nurtured, the thread that bound them, urged her to stay. She glanced at Kellen. His hand hovered near hers, offering strength without forcing it. His gaze held no expectation, only quiet understanding. Alara made her choice. She would not flee. Not now. Not ever. The human noble's eyes darkened with anger, and he stepped forward. But before he could act, Kellen moved with the fluid grace of shadows, intercepting him. The noble stumbled back, surprised by the speed and power in Kellen's movements. "You do not understand this world," Kellen said, his voice low and dangerous. "You cannot threaten what you do not comprehend." Alara's pulse quickened as she watched. She had never seen anyone move like this, so precise, so controlled, yet so fierce. And in that moment, she understood the truth of the man beside her. Beneath the power, beneath the centuries of rule and shadow, there was something fragile, something human. He protected her not out of obligation, but because he chose to. Because he cared. As the human noble retreated, defeated but not destroyed, Kellen turned to her, his expression softer now, almost vulnerable. "You see," he said quietly, "it is not just the night you must face. It is the fear within yourself. And sometimes the tests come from those you least expect." Alara nodded, her chest still tight with adrenaline and relief. I understand, she said. I think I do. But it's so much to take in. Kellen's gaze softened further, and he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, almost gentle, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. Do not be afraid of what you feel, Alara, he murmured. The connection between us, it is real. It is stronger than doubt or fear. Her heart ached with longing, and for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge it. She was drawn to him, not merely by curiosity or the pull of destiny, but by something deeper, a bond that defied explanation. And in his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own feelings, tempered by caution, shaped by centuries of solitude and power. The night stretched on, and the castle seemed alive around them. Shadows whispered along the walls, the wind carried distant secrets, and the torchlight flickered in rhythm with their hearts. They stood together in silence, connected not by words but by presence, by trust, by the invisible thread that had begun to weave their fates together. Then, just as Alara thought the night would pass without further disturbance, a sudden crash echoed through the corridors, a sound of breaking stone, of splintering wood. The castle shuddered as if responding to some unseen force. Kellen stiffened instantly, his eyes flashing with alertness. Alara, he said, his voice sharp now, the calm control replaced by urgency. Stay close. The threat is not gone. It has only begun. Alara felt her pulse spike, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She clutched his hand, and in that moment, she understood fully what it meant to belong to this night, not as a pawn, not as a guest, but as someone who shared in the danger, the power, and the destiny that was theirs to face together. The castle's shadows deepened, stretching across the halls like living things. Alara could hear faint whispers, the soft rustle of movement where none should be, and she realized, with a mixture of dread and awe, that the night was far from over. Kellen's voice reached her again, calm but resolute, as he led her toward the source of the disturbance. We face it together, he said, and she felt the strength in his words, the unspoken promise, and as they disappeared into the twisting corridors, she knew with certainty that her courage, her heart, and the bond she shared with the vampire king would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The night had chosen them both, and the world beyond the castle walls was moving against them. Alara's hand brushed Kellen's, and for the first time, she allowed herself to lean on him not just for protection, but for understanding, for comfort, and for the strange, thrilling connection that had grown between them. The shadows whispered, the wind moaned through the halls, and the castle seemed to hold its breath. Outside, danger waited. Inside, the threads of trust, longing, and power tightened around them both. And in the silence that followed, Kellen murmured softly, near her ear, no one else has ever seen me this way. Stay, or the world will take you from me. Alara's heart thundered in response. She did not step back. She did not hesitate. She stayed. The night was far from over, and neither of them would emerge unchanged. The castle trembled under the weight of the approaching storm. Shadows moved unnaturally across the walls, whispering secrets older than memory. Alara's heart pounded as she followed Kellen through the corridors, their hands clasped tightly. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, signaling that the night was no longer merely a backdrop, it was alive, testing them, challenging them, demanding courage and trust. Kellen led her to the grand hall, where the air shimmered with dark energy. The mirrors along the walls vibrated, reflecting not just their images, but faint visions of things she could not understand, flashes of fire, crumbling towers, and a figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes gleaming like molten silver. The curse has awakened, Kellen said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. It is older than kingdoms, older than bloodlines. It will take what it wants, unless we stop it together. Alara's chest tightened. A curse? What kind of curse? Kellen's gaze met hers, steady and deep, one that binds fate to shadow, that feeds on fear and doubt. If it reaches the heart of this castle, it will destroy everything. The human world, the vampire realm, and you, all of it. Alara's fear surged, yet beneath it, a spark of determination flared. She had come too far to turn back. The night had claimed her, and now she would face it, not as a frightened guest, but as a partner in this battle, in this story that belonged to her as much as to Kellen. The first wave of the curse struck like a tempest. Shadows broke from the corners of the room, twisting into shapes she could barely comprehend. The air thickened, heavy with magic older than time, and the mirrors on the walls shattered, spraying silver fragments across the stone floor. Kellen moved swiftly, his presence a shield against the darkness. He raised his hand, and waves of light pulsed from his fingers, pushing back the shadows, forcing them to retreat. Yet the curse was relentless, shifting, seeking weakness, probing both their minds and hearts. "Elara!" Kellen shouted, as a tendril of shadow lashed toward her. She ducked instinctively, the darkness grazing her shoulder, cold and biting. But instead of panicking, she remembered his lessons, the courage he had nurtured in her. She raised her hands and focused, imagining a shield of light forming around them. To her surprise, it worked. The shadows recoiled, hissing as they struck the barrier. Her heart raced, but a thrill ran through her to the first time she had felt the power of the night flowing through her own resolve. Not just Kellen's protection. Kellen's eyes widened in astonishment and pride. "You've learned faster than I imagined," he said, his voice steady amidst the chaos. "The night has chosen you, Elara. You are more than you realize." They fought together, a perfect, fluid partnership. Shadows rose and fell, the curse testing them in ways that went beyond physical strength. It sought to pry into their fears, their doubts, their inner darkness. Yet each time it struck, Kellen and Elara faced it as one. In a brief pause, she looked at him, her chest heaving. "Kellen, I never imagined this world, this power, but I trust you. I trust us." Kellen's gaze softened, and for a moment, the storm of shadows outside and inside the hall faded, leaving only the intensity of their connection. "Trust is the greatest strength of all," he whispered. His hand reached for hers, and their fingers intertwined. "You've shown me something I thought was lost, something beyond the centuries of solitude." Elara felt her heart tighten with longing. "And what is that?" "Hope," he said, his voice barely audible, yet it resonated through the hall. "The hope that even in darkness, something bright and true can exist. And that even I, the Vampire King, am not alone." Their moment was brief, yet powerful. The shadows surged again, a massive wave of darkness that threatened to engulf the hall. Kellen moved to intercept it, but this time, Elara did not step back. She focused, drawing on the courage that had grown inside her, and together, they became a force neither shadow nor curse could break. The final confrontation was both terrifying and beautiful. Light and shadow clashed in the center of the hall, spiraling in a storm of energy that bent the very air around them. Kellen's voice echoed in her mind, steadying her, guiding her, and she felt the thread that had bound them since the masquerade strengthened, connecting their wills, their hearts, their very essence. "Now!" Kellen shouted, and they combined their strength. A surge of light radiating from their joined hands, striking the heart of the shadow. The darkness screamed, a soundless cry that shook the castle to its foundation. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm ended. Silence fell. The castle walls no longer trembled. The mirrors, though cracked, no longer flickered. The shadows receded, leaving the hall illuminated by pale moonlight. Elara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kellen knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his gaze filled with pride and something else, an emotion she had been drawn to since the night of the masquerade. "Love, you did it," he said softly. "We did it." Together, Elara's voice trembled, but she smiled. Together, she repeated. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she felt that their bond was no longer just a strange pull of fate, but a choice they had made together. Courage, trust, and love had intertwined to defeat the darkness. Kellen took both her hands in his, holding them as if afraid they might vanish. "Elara, you have changed me. You have shown me that even the oldest, strongest night can be brightened by something pure, something living. You have given me hope, and in doing so, you have given yourself to me." Elara felt her chest tighten, the words settling deep within her heart. She had feared the night, feared the unknown, feared herself. but standing beside Kellen, facing the curse and the shadows. She realized that her fear had only made her stronger, only made her bond with him more profound. I choose you, she said, her voice steady now, full of conviction. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I choose you, Kellen. His eyes softened, glimmering with emotion she could barely name. Slowly, he leaned toward her, their foreheads touching, their breaths mingling. The castle around them seemed to hold its breath, the moonlight bathing them in silver glow. You have always been mine, he murmured, and now, willingly, you are my partner, my equal, my heart. Alara smiled through tears she had not known she was holding. And you are mine, Kellen. No shadows, no curses. Nothing can change that. For a long moment, they remained like that, connected not by fate alone, but by choice, courage, and the love that had grown through trials, shadows, and night. The castle, which had seemed so threatening before, now felt like home. The corridors, the torches, the mirrors, they were no longer symbols of fear, but of endurance, learning. And the bond they shared died as dawn began to touch the horizon. Painting the sky with hues of gold and purple, Kellen led Alara to the balcony. The forest stretched beyond, silent and serene after the storm. The threat of the curse had passed, but its memory lingered, a reminder of the night's trials and the strength they had discovered in each other. Alara looked at him, her heart full. What now? She asked softly. Kellen smiled, a rare, human smile that lit his face. Now, we live. We protect the night and each other. We face whatever comes, together. And perhaps, we finally allow ourselves to be happy. Alara leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. The steady beat of his heart wore the rhythm of something eternal against her own. Together, she repeated. And for the first time, the night felt safe, and the future, uncertain as it might be, felt full of promise. The shadows of the castle receded into quiet corners, the echoes of fear and danger fading. And in the golden light of dawn, Kellen and Alara stood united not just by fate or circumstance, but by courage, trust, and love. The Vampire King had once whispered that nothing would be canceled. And now, at last, Alara understood. It was not a threat, but a promise of enduring bond, of shared courage, and of a love that could withstand even the darkest night. Together, they faced the rising sun, ready to embrace whatever the world and the night would bring.